Good weather here, son.
That's nice.
Yeah, good weather. I got
Finally.
yeah, Memorial Day, but some British friends gave me some good British beer, so I'm gonna be enjoying those after the podcast.
Nice.
All right, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. We've just finished watching Monaco, the Monaco Grand Prix, Monte Carlo. A lovely day until the rains came, but that made for a more exciting race. Patrick, son, can I get your take on Monaco Grand Prix 2023?
Yeah, Monaco. Uh, this is peak Formula One. Um, I hope it never goes away. Uh, I don't know anybody who would want it to, unless you're just a loser. Uh, this was awesome. It was a great weekend, great race. I mean, Monaco always puts on a show, but um, this whole weekend was actually very exciting on track as well. um it was just a lot of fun, some um good battles, some kind of crazy situations, and yeah, the rain made for a bit of a hectic end to the race, um which was fun to watch as well. So uh,
Yeah, I think as the cars get bigger, heavier, wider, faster, Monaco becomes more difficult to stage a race, a Formula One race. But it's history, almost 100 years old now. It's it's fundamental, I think, still to Formula One, even if, for example, Formula One, Liberty Media seem to want to gravitate toward Las Vegas as sort of becoming the premier show event of the year. But I think Monaco is saying, not so fast. We still have the glitz, the glamour, and we have the history, and we can still put on a fun race. So that was good to see. I also want to say, speaking of rain, Imola was washed out. That should have been our 50th episode, son. So, Monaco, this episode is our 50th episode.
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, so from your hillbilly relations, we, we come from people who want really nothing more than a drink, a pillow to lay their head, maybe an ashtray for their cigarettes. Uh, they are average of sized but outsized in grit, and they just want to be left alone. And their only obligation is to God. They are not a people big on celebrating, but let's just mark this occasion, our 50th episode. We began by thinking, hey, now that you've moved away, how do we still talk about Formula One? We were watching it back when nobody else in America seemed to want to watch it, and now it seems like everyone wants to. So that's great to see. Now, enough of that. Back to the podcast. Max looked peerless, but Red Bull does not. Am I wrong in that assumption?
um I think you're not completely wrong in that assumption. I think Red Bull on the whole is certainly the best team on the grid, uh, but there is competition, very obviously, from the likes of Aston and Mercedes. Um, I think we see um, how much drivers actually mean to a team, though. Um, right, and it's why they get paid millions of dollars to do their jobs. Verstappen is arguably the best driver on the grid, and he's sort of, as you mentioned, perhaps peerless. But I think, Alonso pretty much every week or every race this season has taken the fight to Red Bull and to Max. Um, and then, you see Mercedes, they're now only a couple points behind Aston in the constructors, because they have two very good, very solid drivers that may not necessarily be competing for podiums in that car, but every week they're right there near the top, both of them.
Yeah, I had said that by Imola, which was canceled, so by Monaco, Mercedes would be in second. And then not look back. Fernando Alonso is single-handedly holding them back. I think Barcelona might be the final week where Aston can stay in second place, because with the car upgrades, Lewis Hamilton plus George Russell, I think Mercedes will take second. But it's great to watch Alonso week in, week out, still being one of the best drivers in Formula One, being one of the best drivers in the world. But back to Max, he came in at 17. He is, I think, clearly the best driver on the grid. I think he'll go down as one of the best drivers ever. He's chased off Danny Kvyat, Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon. He's chased off every teammate, but not Sergio Perez. I don't know. Is it finally starting to get to Sergio? He had an awful week.
Yeah, I have been critical of Perez, not really putting up any fight against Max in his now 2+ years that he's been there. And I think it's fairly evident that Max brings it every week. And regardless of whether or not his qualifying is poor by his standards, or he has a setback with a vehicle issue, he still ends up getting a major points haul. He ends up finishing near the top. He fights through everything and just executes properly. Perez, once one thing happens or goes against him, he seems to crumble. And that is what happened this weekend. He made a big mistake in qualifying. And then the rest of the weekend just fell apart. And so there's an element of just mental fortitude that you have to have, just being a driver in Formula One, and then certainly being the teammate to the best driver on the grid. And I think, it's evident that Perez is not at Verstappen's level. He's been, a solid number 2 for Red Bull, but I'm just not sure how much longer that's going to last.
Speaking of unequal teammates, Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin, like we said, he's currently second in the standings and shouldn't be. He's holding off Mercedes. However, he has nearly all the points for that team. The team Aston Martin, owned by Lance Stroll, Fernando's compatriot, the other driver, is Lawrence Stroll's son, Lance Stroll. Do you think there's ever going to be a time when Lawrence Stroll says, Lance, I think it's time perhaps you take an office job?
That's a good question. I don't know what that dynamic is like. I think in terms of simple business, it seems like it would make sense to try to find somebody else and put them in that other Aston, and see if they can hold their own and actually allow Aston to be a second place finisher in the constructors. I mean, that would be pretty incredible if they achieved something like that. And the way Lance Stroll is driving, it looks very unlikely that that will happen. I mean,
Yeah.
the way Alonso is driving, right? It looks like, damn, maybe they can, but that just doesn't seem sustainable, right? So, from a business perspective, it seems like the better option to find somebody else in that car. But I mean, he's his son. Like, I don't know. It's that's a tough one, man.
That would be a tough one. But, I mean, like we said, Aston right now is still about, I think, a point ahead. They're in second place, but that won't last just because it's pretty much all Fernando. The Mercedes with the upgrades, that's the better car. So we'll see. However, as much as I believe Red Bull will finish first, Mercedes second, shocking to me is that Aston, even with Lance Stroll, but thanks to the car and Fernando Alonso, could finish in third, Ferrari in fourth. This seems what should be inexplicable that Ferrari, with Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, and that car and that team and those resources, would finish fourth. But that looks extremely realistic.
It does indeed. I just think both of these drivers, Leclerc and Sainz, are extremely good drivers, but they seem to have this thing in their brains where, like, they're almost certain that they can't compete on equal terms with these other drivers or teams, Mercedes, Aston, Red Bull, and so they do these sort of inexplicable things to, I don't know, extend their uh, tire session, or try to gain a tenth in a slow corner by going way too fast, and they fuck everything up. It's like, just I don't know what they're doing, but I can't continue to put everything on the team and not on these drivers, because both of them seem like they're just screwing up too much in little areas, little details. But I mean, that is Formula One. And I think, if they keep doing that, and Ferrari keeps sort of bottling strategy and making these weird decisions from the paddock, like, I don't see them out competing a Fernando Alonso who's on his game. And that might mean they come in fourth behind, essentially, Fernando Alonso. So,
Now, speaking of both Alonso and strategy, Alonso and Aston were criticized for not switching, I believe it was to the wets initially when everybody else was doing that. I thought they made the right call. I will tell you why. I think because crafty, wily Fernando Alonso knew that the only way he can beat Max, who is the best driver on the grid, and Red Bull, the best car, is really you kind of swing for the fences. This, and so I don't fault Alonso or Aston for their tire decision, even though a lot of folks are. I just felt like he knew he probably could take that risk and still come in second, get on the podium, but it was worth it to try and perhaps get a win. What do you think?
yeah, I mean, I think that's always like a hard decision to make. I, he absolutely needed to come in on the lap that he came in on, before Verstappen did. So that was the right call. Unfortunately, at that point, it was unclear whether or not the track was going to be too wet to drive on slick tires. So they made a call, and it ended up being the wrong tire to be on. So they had, what, 25, 30 seconds in hand on third place
Okay.
anyways.
Yep.
Um, so it wasn't going to be devastating if it was the wrong decision. But I mean, for the most part, I agree with you. It was the the right lap to come in on to try to undercut Max, um, gain a few seconds on the best tire to be on. Unfortunately, uh, they made the wrong call on how wet the track was going to be one lap from then. Um, and so, it ended up kind of screwing him, and he came in second by 20 seconds instead of 3 seconds. But like, it's the same points haul, so
Right.
not a
That's
huge deal for him.
that's kind of what I thought. Why don't you give me your top five for the weekend, not just for the race itself?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure the top three are obvious. So my top driver of the day, same as the fan vote, Esteban Ocon. He had an unreal qualifying performance, which really was P4, but he got bumped up to P3. Um, that was awesome from him in the Alpine, and I think he showed a lot more pace than he really should have in that car. And then, you know, held off challenges throughout the race. He got smacked by Carlos Sainz a couple of times, just kept on driving, kept a cool head, and podiumed in Monaco. And that is a special thing for a young French driver, for that French team. So Esteban Ocon is my driver of the day or
Nice.
weekend.
I think that's worthy. Yes.
And then, we talked about him a lot already on this show. Fernando Alonso. He just continues to impress and excite in that Aston Martin. His teammate qualified way, way down, didn't even get into Q3, and then, looked like the only driver on track that could even remotely keep pace with Verstappen. Um, so another impressive outing for him. Then, of course, the race winner, I have Max Verstappen. Just excellent again. The qualifying lap that he did was crazy. And I was probably the best qualifying session of the season so far. It was very exciting, right down to the last second there. And Verstappen pulled that out of the bag, and Monaco is hard to pass on, like you mentioned earlier. So qualifying well is really important, and Max knew that and did the job he needed to do. Um, and so really impressive from him all weekend. And then fourth and fifth, I actually have the two McLaren drivers, Norris and Piastri. I think that
Wow.
McLaren is tough to handle, and they both ended up doing really well. I think in terms of um, the actual capability of that car, they both ended up getting into the points, and really just had solid races. A few nice passes on some competitive drivers, and got for McLaren this year a decent points haul. So I say good for them.
That was nice to see. McLaren has been such a disappointment this year, and even though Lando's already been around a few years, that's a young team. So I really hope they continue to improve that car, because watching Lando and the rookie Oscar Piastri uh, compete is going to be a lot of fun. So I am generally in agreement with your top five: Ocon, Alonso, Max, Lando, and Piastri. What do you think was the best surprise of the Monaco Grand Prix?
Um, I think, well, that's a good question. Probably like, well, for one, the Alpine team, I think was very exciting. You know, they got a podium, and then Gasly like split the Ferrari pair and was really racing hard and showed good pace. And it's exciting to see Alpine looking like they may be able to take that step forward after a pretty disappointing Miami Grand Prix, to take a step forward and try to compete with some of the top teams. You know, they've been a lot more consistent over the years than McLaren has, who's sort of their main competitor. And so, you know, it's nice to see Alpine sort of moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, Monaco is essentially French in my view, and seeing Ocon on the podium, seeing Alpine do so well, the French team doing so well in Monaco was fun to see. For me, I think the best surprise, I think maybe you're right. I think it was Alpine. After that, it was just Monaco itself. It looked beautiful. It gave us a fun race, still brought all the glamour. Qualifying was fun. So I'm going to add that. What about biggest disappointment?
Oh boy. I mean, it almost has to be Sergio Perez, I guess. I can't think of something else that's like sticking out in my mind aside from maybe like a Ferrari just sort of fumbling the bag over and over again. But at that point, that gets kind of old to keep repeating the same thing is disappointing. Um, so I'll say Checo Perez this weekend. You know, after a good performance in Miami overall, you know, with this comeback and uh, you know, everyone keeps saying, "Oh, is this the year? Like, can Perez put pressure on Verstappen for the drivers' championship?" And then, I mean, just making a fool of himself in the first qualifying session, um, which ultimately made him start at the back of the grid, and then I don't know, he crashed multiple times in the race and was just like totally a mess. It
Yeah.
was pretty disappointing to see that from, you know, the other Red Bull driver.
Yeah, Perez has to be, I think, the biggest disappointment given that car, given that it was a street race, given that Max won. And so much of that was self-inflicted on Perez's fault. For me, Perez, Ferrari, obviously, you can't even say it's heartbreak anymore because I'm not even seeing much heart from Ferrari. Um, Another one, I think, Logan Sargent. He had a
Mm.
reasonably decent qualifying, but in the race he looked hapless. And for all the hype, hopes for all the hype, um, he's just not looked very good. I think the only other, I hate to say it's a disappointment, but a lot of teams, Mercedes in particular, had some big upgrades planned for Imola,
Mm.
and you really don't get to see the value of those, I think, is fully at a track like Monaco. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Now, the virtual podium. So on the actual podium, it was Max and Alonso again, and with Ocon. But for the virtual podium, for me, it's those helicopter shots. Those were just amazing. Really showed off Monte Carlo. I loved them.
Yeah, that is a good one. They were it was really cool to see from the helicopter view. The that city, the harbor there, just so I don't know. It's like an iconic Formula One destination. Very cool to see. I think the other thing that was like so Monaco, and this is going to be my virtual podium. I don't know who it was, but there was a yacht that had just a Ferrari F40 sitting on the deck. And like, damn, dude, that
Right.
was so Monaco, and whoever that was, they're gonna have to get that car washed and waxed after that because the rain came in. But man, that was pretty cool to see. Just like probably the coolest Ferrari car ever made.
I mean,
Sitting on a yacht in Monaco.
oh yeah, we are in an age where new money is better than old money. And because new money is more showy and fun, and that's what we want right now. And yes, a yacht in Monaco with a Ferrari F40 on deck. That's how you do it. So that's a good one. Okay, switching to the soft compound. We have replaced the rumors of Charles Leclerc going to Mercedes with rumors of Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari. Anything to make of those, Patrick?
I mean, neither one of those is going to happen. Dude, like Hamilton would rescind like two of his drivers' championships to avoid going to Ferrari. Like, no way he would ever want to do that.
I
Yeah.
I think the more fun rumors are of acrimony, allegedly, between George and Lewis. I'd like to stoke those rumors. I did see something where Total, when asked about tension between George and Lewis, his response was he can only laugh at such rumors. And I thought, that's not a denial. So I'm going to keep up with those rumors.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I think Lewis will sign with Mercedes. It's not going to be like this whole big deal. But I think you know it wouldn't shock me if Hamilton and Russell didn't get along. Because like Hamilton is the great, and Russell, I think, wants to be great naturally. And in order to just sort of prove himself, he has to beat Lewis, which he's not doing so far this season. Um, and yeah, I mean, I just think it's probably not unreasonable to believe that like they're not getting along at all.
um, what do you think of this rumor, which is that Alfa Romeo is going to maybe team up with or acquire the Haas team? Because Alfa Romeo right now works with Sauber, and they are going to be moving toward, I think, a relationship with Audi. And so I heard that, and I thought, I don't know about that. Alfa Romeo wants to remain in F1, but Gene Haas, the owner of the Haas team, has spent so much money building up that Haas brand. Um, I mean, what would we call this? Alfa Romeo Haas Crypto.com team? I mean, some weird thing. So I don't, it's funny with only 10 teams, and technically two teams owned by Red Bull, AlphaTauri and Red Bull. You know that there's there's going to be a lot of folks who are left hanging.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I just the idea of not having 10 teams is a little bit weird. um, you know, I think it would be interesting. Let's say that happened. Okay, now I'm getting off topic. But if that happened, there were 9 teams, they should definitely go to 3 drivers per team. Um, but
Hmm.
uh, but yeah, I mean, Alfa Romeo Haas is kind of a weird combo, it seems like, since both are so shitty. Um, but like, I guess pooling your resources and trying to actually be competitive, um, I, it if that happened, I don't think it would be the end of the world, and it would be, um, hopefully beneficial for both of those teams. Um, but yeah, it would be interesting to see what sort of the management of that team would look like if such a thing happened.
I thought it was a good contrast between Toto Wolff, team principal for Mercedes, and Christian Horner, team principal for Red Bull. Toto's a money guy. Christian Horner's a race guy. Whenever Toto Wolff gets asked about an 11th team, he always says, it's going to dilute the money. Even if if a new team comes in and gives a $200 million entry fee or higher, more likely, you're still now splitting the purse between 11 teams, not 10. But Christian Horner had a different point, which is in a lot of these tracks, 11 teams becomes very difficult. That's now 22 cars. And a lot of tracks, Monaco, Zandvoort, several others, a lot of the European tracks, that's going to be a tough one. So it'll be interesting to see. I think as Formula One gets more popular, as Formula One in America gets more popular, more money flowing into the sport, you're going to have more auto companies wanting to be part of it, more tech companies wanting to be part of it, brands just wanting to promote themselves. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. Although I think, speaking of all the money coming into it, there's also means sort of the non-race elements are going to get promoted more heavily. I've always said when F1 shows up, that's like the circus coming to town. There was no race at Imola last week, 2 weeks ago, but in Miami, there were some people who complained about the driver introductions because they made a big deal. Let's have, I think it was LL Cool J, um, uh, sort of bringing out the drivers one by one. I actually thought that was fine and something worth considering because, fans are paying a lot of money. The F1 shows up, it's a big deal. So I always just thought, a lot of drivers complained, but I thought, I like the drivers who didn't complain. Alonso didn't complain. He thought it was fine. We discussed this before where I think Daniel Ricciardo, if he was still in a seat, he probably would have liked that. So I think you have those drivers where they're just all business, but then others who I think realize, this is a show. It's not just a sporting event. Like a football game is a sporting event. The Super Bowl is a show. Every F1 race is a show.
Yeah, agreed. I like, obviously we have a very American perspective, but I don't understand any of the drivers who complained about that. Like, what was wrong with it? You're giving your fans, like, more to cheer about and more excitement and the opportunity to, like, I don't know, just cheer for you. And I don't know. It seems weird to me that anybody would be opposed to doing that. But
All right, now let's ask the stewards. I've got a few questions to ask the stewards, who are us, by the way.
yes.
Anyone on the fire list? We talked this race, Alpine did well, McLaren did well, and we've talked before that perhaps team principals Zach Brown at McLaren, Otmar Safnauer, or however he says his name at Alpine, perhaps should be fired. Maybe Logan Sargent, maybe Nick DeVries. Any change on the firing list, Patrick?
Firing list. I don't know. After this race, maybe. I don't see anybody obvious on the firing list after this race. I think maybe we can look at Ferrari and look at, like, the technical director, Laurent Mekies, or however you pronounce his name, and say, like, dude, this car sucks. Your Ferrari, why does it suck so bad? And he can be on the firing list because that car is just just woeful and has not seemed like any upgrades have worked at all. I think, continuing along with Gunter Steiner there at Haas, I mean, that team is Magnussen and Hulkenberg are good drivers, and they can't get anywhere near anybody. That's not good. You have to be better. And it's been many years that Gunter Steiner has been there at Haas, and they've been pretty much the worst team, save for Williams, the whole time he's been there.
Yeah,
That's not good.
yeah, yeah. I think Steiner gets a pass from a lot of people because he plays so well in front of the camera. I also think the owner Gene Haas relies upon him to do everything, and and on a tight budget, and so that gives him a long leash as well. But I do think Gunther's days should be numbered. You know, F1 has gotten so corporate, and I'm not saying that necessarily as a negative, but it's gotten so corporate. There's so many more billions of dollars in the sport. It's just grown in global popularity. So it's no longer a sport, I think, that can enable the hustlers anymore. And one of the all-time great F1 hustlers is Eddie Jordan. He used to manage a team, own a team. He said not too long ago that Alonso should have many more wins, many more championships, but he does not because he chased the money. Now, this is a common belief that Alonso chased the money and that cost him somewhat his legendary status because he should have at least 3 championships, for example, maybe 4. Instead of 32 wins, maybe 50 wins. I think this is a wrong view. And the reason I do is because, to the detriment perhaps to the fans, the last 20 years almost of F1 has been a situation where there has been one dominant car. Red Bull for many years, Mercedes for many years, Red Bull again, probably for many years, even though we're really only a year and a half at most into this new era. There really was nowhere for Alonso to go. He wasn't going to be able to go to Red Bull. He wasn't going to be able to go to Mercedes. So in that scenario, chase the money. I don't think he sort of chose money over wins. I think he chose more money over less money. Do you have any thoughts on that, Patrick?
Well, I don't know Alonso personally, but I'm pretty sure Alonso's personality, he cares more about winning than money. So I think that's a ridiculous notion to say that he, you know, only chose certain destinations for money. Um, I guess 2 things. One, he lost a championship to Hamilton barely. He lost a championship to Vettel barely on the last
in a
race by a couple points.
in a
Um,
much lesser car.
in a freaking rental. Um, uh, I mean, it's crazy. And then he went from uh, he went to Ferrari, which, I mean, there's probably no driver who's not winning championships with their current team that would turn down a job at Ferrari. Um, like maybe current fans don't understand what Ferrari means to Formula One, but it is Formula One. So for Alonso to be like, yeah, I'll go to Ferrari, that doesn't mean he's chasing money. It means he's like, he understands the sport. Like that is the Toronto Maple Leafs, the New York Yankees. I don't know. It's Manchester United, right? Like, they are Formula One. So it's not crazy to me that he went there. And then, they sucked. So he's like, all right, let me go to another iconic Formula One team, McLaren. And then they sucked. And he was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to leave Formula One because this is garbage. I don't think at any point he was just chasing money. He was like, this is, uh, I don't know. The path for him was weird, and he certainly could have had more championships if the teams that he was on were competitive at all. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, even though they should have been. Ferrari and McLaren, you can't be like, oh, that was a bad decision to move to one of those teams. That doesn't make any sense to me. So,
Across the line, that is our segment where we choose who will be the top 5 drivers, finishers in the next race. The next race is in Barcelona. Our predictions for Imola don't count since that race was scrubbed, which also meant we weren't able to put in our predictions for Monte Carlo, for Monaco. So, before we make our selections for Barcelona, Patrick, can you tell me the current standings? And I should remind our listeners, if our driver finishes in the top 5, we get a point. If they finish in the exact spot we predict, we get 3 points. So, Patrick, what are the current standings?
current standings are you have 25 points to my 18.
Wow, I took a nice lead there over the long break. That's excellent. Excellent. Good news for me. Good news for me. All right, who picks first this week?
You pick first.
Awesome. Well, Barcelona, Spain. I'm going with the Spaniard, Fernando Alonso.
Damn.
That will be his 33rd win. It will be the longest gap between wins in Formula One history. And that is my prediction for Barcelona, Spain. Barcelona, my favorite city in the world, except possibly Melbourne, except possibly Vancouver. But we'll say Barcelona is my favorite.
It's Barcelona.
Right. All right. Who do you got?
I guess since you took my pick, I'll take the other obvious one, the current world champion and leader for this World Drivers' Championship. I'll take Max Verstappen. And then P2. Perhaps we'll take another Spaniard, Carlos Sainz.
Oh, nice. Nice. Max and Carlos. Okay. For my second, I think those Mercedes upgrades will pay off. I think this is when Mercedes takes over second place in the constructors. But instead of Lewis coming in second, I'm going to pick George Russell and then Lewis Hamilton. So Mercedes 2 and 3.
Damn. Okay. Interesting. Let's see. You know what? I think we're gonna have some interesting finishers here in Spain, and so I'll take the other Ferrari driver in P3, Leclerc, and then I think he'll put it all together, and he's in a very good car. Lance Stroll, P4.
Wow. Here we are dogging on Lance Stroll, and you've got him coming in fourth in Barcelona. That would be good. For my fourth, I am going to take Sergio Perez. That car is just too good. He's got to crack the top 5. I don't see him missing out on a top 5 in 2 races in a row. And in fifth, he lost out to his teammate this week, Esteban Ocon. I'm going to go with Alpine's Pierre Gasly. So my top five are Alonso, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Sergio Perez, and Pierre Gasly.
You keep taking all my picks. I guess in that case, I'll have to take the other Alpine podium finisher this week, Esteban Ocon.
Okay, so you've got Max, Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, Lance Stroll, and Esteban Ocon. Okay, all right. Any crazy predictions for the race or the rest of the season, Patrick?
Well, I don't think they're that crazy. My initial prediction that I literally have written down is that Alonso wins in Spain. So you have that covered. And then I think this was it. This was the turning point for Sergio Perez. He will not be able to recover. He just keeps falling down the order and eventually gets booted from Red Bull during the summer break.
Wow, I do not see that happening, but that would be an interesting one. I'm going to go. I don't have anything particularly crazy. Fernando wins in Spain, his 33rd. The other Spaniard, Carlos Sainz, comes in second.
Yes.
And that would be that's my semi-crazy, fully justifiable position, my prediction. All right. I want to remind our listeners, send your questions or comments to hardcompoundpod@gmail.com. We may read them on the show. We definitely will read them. And I wish to thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
All right. Good show, son. Good show. I don't think we probably were a bit too hard on some folks like Lance and maybe Sergio, but that is what it is. I was, I'm not sure why, but I was in the mood to feel miserable. And so I put on the Pogues and then sort of gravitated toward, I think it's Waltzing Matilda. The band played Waltzing Matilda, and that made me feel the appropriate amount of miserable that I wanted to feel.
Well, that's